in the digital world, which, your podcast is all about death and dying in the digital age. He's always around in the digital world, right? I didn't delete pictures of him, and if when I was still in the same house and I was with my current partner, there were pictures everywhere. Like, I didn't take anything down because that just did not feel right to me. And it wasn't until I moved that the pictures came down and got put into a book. And the weird feeling that I get is that he has sort of become a part of me. And I don't think I've spoken to other widowed people about that, but I know that his spirit is doing his thing, which I'm not quite sure of the details there, but I feel like he's become a part of me. Like, there's so much of him that I absorbed and I changed because of knowing him and because of losing him.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Nikki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. Welcome back to another episode of Death and Dying in the Digital Age, a podcast where we're exploring what it means in the digital age when preparing for death. And today, we're speaking with Whitney. Now, Whitney is a dating and relationship expert and a love coach. Whitney and I, we met during a networking meeting. And, Whitney, when we met a few months ago, we were just talking about our businesses. I had no idea you actually had a story. And if you can share that story, then we can, I would love to ask you more questions with that.
Everybody's going to die. And we do need to prepare for it and have, somebody that knows our passwords, and this is strange because my husband passed away after a back surgery that was supposed to be in and out, no problem. But he had a dream as a kid that he was going to die at 37. And I think he lived his whole life believing that. And I remember on his 37th birthday, he didn't open his gifts and he canceled his dinner. And it was like he was being really weird. And then, a few months later, he had that surgery and he passed away. So he had been sick a few years ago before, but then got mostly better. So it was a big shock. But it was as if he knew, because he had prepared me with the information that I needed. A lot of marriages, male, female, the male or the more masculine partner will take care of everything. And then the other partner is kind of like, oh, whatever, he takes care of it. But it's important to share those responsibilities and at least share the information so that, God forbid, something does happen to somebody suddenly, that, it's hard enough. And that grieving process, you're not yourself, you can't think straight, you don't want to be dealing with this form and this account and this. And yeah, in this digital age, it's like I logged into his LinkedIn and, and his Facebook account and all these just things you don't really think of.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. Did you and your husband, knowing that he had this sense about his life and that it was going to be shorter, did he ever talk to you about what he wanted for you after he was gone?
No, the only thing that he said was, and he waited until years into our relationship, the year before he turned 37, he told me about the dream, but he didn't, I don't think he knew. And he didn't say anything like, if I'm gone, do this, do that.
And it's a difficult conversation to have, that those dare to ask questions, but now that you've gone through that experience, as a dating coach, is that something that you advise your clients? How do you have those difficult conversations? I see it as three different scenarios. One is, do you have it when life is good and everything's happy and you make kind of a sly joke, hey, if I ever die, I want you to date or I don't want you to date. Did that ever come up?
So I have a funny story about that. An older woman that I know, who I won't name names, but she lost her husband to cancer. And while he was sick, they had that conversation of, I'm going to be gone. I want you to be happy. I want you to find someone. But he said, but just know that when you're having sex, I'm going to pinch you on the butt. And it's like haunted her because I don't know. It's kind of funny because he had a sense of humor, but she hasn't dated and she hasn't moved on. And I think she's a strong, independent, awesome woman that, not a lot of guys can handle, probably. But I think she has a sense of, it's weird. Like when I lost my husband, I remember thinking, if you lose your brother, he's still always your brother. If you lose your dad, it's still always your dad. If you lose your husband, it's still always your husband. And so when I first became single, I had this thought that nobody could replace him. I'm already always going to be in love with him. I might as well just be polyamorous. Like I'm going to need multiple partners to even equal him. And I already have one partner. So it's already going to feel like I'm cheating. And, that was a phase and a stage. And eventually I did have the desire to date and be with one person. And that happened about a year after my husband passed. So everybody said, and I read books that said, wait 1 year before you make big drastic changes. So I stayed in the same house. I went back to my same corporate HR, talent acquisition management job. But about a year to 2 years later, all of that changed. I left my corporate job. I became a matchmaker, which was this blend of recruiting, which I had been doing, and psychology, which was my passion and what I studied. And I met my partner. I ended up moving states to be in a new place, a new home, new school for my son, new industry, new friends. Like I completely changed my life. And it's not like I really chose that. It just happened. And at that point, the question becomes, what are you going to do with that? And I could have stayed. I said initially that I was going to stay for 10 years. I was like, I'll just stay the next 10 years until my son is graduated from high school. And we're just going to stay in this house and I'm not going to be with anyone else. And it's funny how the same person over time can really have very different opinions and beliefs and life.
And life decisions. I mean, what you're describing, I think, is not uncommon, which is, we're talking about having those conversations and the fact that you didn't have that conversation once you lost your husband. I know my mother went through this. I mean, she was 40 and a widow with 4 children. And because her and my father never had the conversation, you feel lost. How do you move on with your life, giving honor and remembrance to the person who was a significant part of your life. And now that they're not part of your life, it's as though kind of what you did is like you need to create a whole new life, even though you're honoring them. And it gets back to that, when to have those conversations, how to empower people. So looking back now, do you feel that it could have benefited both of you to have that conversation while he was going through the dying process, or even when he was healthy, while you were doing, like, I think you should do it during your estate planning. Like, hey, we're doing our wills and making sure we have, all of our, power of attorney and medical advance directives. So wouldn't it make sense also, hey, honey, by the way, if something did happen, these are my wishes for you to continue to build your next life. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, communication is at the heart of every relationship. So we should be able to talk about everything. So I just think it's important that people don't feel trapped. Like, no, you better not. But I think a lot of people take that on naturally. And I think there's also a really big, what are people going to think factor, because everybody has an opinion. Everybody has advice. I had some people that were like, wow, Whitney, good for you. That's amazing. I'm so happy that you found someone. Like, I wish I could find someone. And that's so great. And then other people just stop talking to me completely because they're like, how could you?
Even after a year's time, and then you like reinvented yourself and went through all the hardship and the grief and the loss, and they still had that
I
opinion.
mean, I don't really know exactly what their opinion is because they just disappeared and don't talk to me. But I think it had to do with like, oh, she can just move on and that's not, she's not hurting. Like, it's like people just make a lot of assumptions about what we're feeling and thinking and what our motivations are just based on the little bit that they know. And as a coach now, I see that this is everywhere in our life, right? And it's really these pivotal moments, these traumatic events that are our biggest opportunity for growth. And I've matured so, so, so much and have just grown spiritually, emotionally, mentally from that experience and from the experience of chasing after the life that I want. Like, I think everybody can get into a rut or a plateau, and when they end up going through the horrible, dreaded thing, whether that's a divorce or breakup or a job loss or a move or a death, it really is that call to grow your resilience, to push through the challenges. And yes, we need to rest and feel our feelings, but we don't want to get stuck in either one. A lot of people get stuck in overdrive and they're doing, and I have to stay busy and they're restless. And that feels really good to them because they're getting things done, they're checking things off the list. But what they don't realize is that when you push down the grief and the emotion that comes from love, it will fester like mold in the deep, dark places and begin to come out in illness, physical symptoms, pain, or other, manifestations of that emotional distress. But the other end of the spectrum is letting yourself get swallowed up by grief and you don't get out of bed and you don't check anything off the list and you can't even, take care of yourself. And I think moments of each one are 100% natural, but at least through my experience and other people that I have worked with as a coach, life is a wave pattern. We have our ups, we have our downs, and it's important to really mind the lowest low and the highest high, like keeping yourself somewhat centered and balanced.
And when you're dating, so just I'm thinking about when you started to date. When and how did you bring the conversation of your husband into a first date, that coffee conversation, without overwhelming or scaring someone, to let them know that you're in a different phase of the grieving process and you're ready to move on, but this is still a significant part of your life, or your husband was a significant part of your life, and how do you navigate those conversations?
So I've been with my partner now for 6 years. And within the first 5 minutes of our date, I was crying and talking about it. And I actually think that that's one of the things that brought us together and made for a good relationship. I was not going to hide it from anybody because it was a big, huge part of where I was at and who I was. And that vulnerability of allowing somebody to see you. It's not like I was like crying on his shoulder, like, comfort me and take care of me and I'm a mess. It was just, he knew beforehand. And when we met for that first date, he asked me about it pretty directly, pretty soon. And I spoke about it very directly. And, I can talk about most of it without crying now after it's been 7+ years, but certain things, even still, if I start talking about like what happened the day of, like I will cry. And so when he was asking me about it and I was telling him, I shed a few tears and it felt very open. I felt like I could be myself and be it whatever way came up. And it was important to me that someone could meet me where I'm at in that process. So I think for anybody who might be widowed or, moving on past that, I think it's important to be open, but also to let that person know that there is space for them.
I just got the chills when you said that, is that the space, that your heart is big enough to welcome them? Because what you're probably creating with your new partner is very different than when you had with your husband.
I just got chills when you said that. I think it's the profound truths that bring out those goosebumps and chills. So,
Oh yeah, my body is tingling.
so I became a matchmaker, one year after my husband passed, or about maybe 11 months or so. So I started. I was on the dating apps and I was recruiting. So I was talking to tons and tons of single guys, and kind of like, I mean, it was my job, but it was also an opportunity to get a lay of the land and see who's out there and see what's going on. But I would tell them all, like, I'm widowed and I'm not dating. And they would just really quickly back off. Like, okay, that's not an area that I'm going to mess with. So it worked well for me because I was able to like keep people away as long as I needed to. And then, after it had been a little more than a year, I kind of felt more open to it. And then that's when I met my current partner.
In your relationship now with your current partner, because you have a son from your husband.
Well, my husband was stepdad.
So but the point is that there was still a family unit, and now you're redefining that family unit. So how do you still honor your husband? Like, do you still have pictures of him in your home, or have you, and what do you recommend? Just clear them out completely when you're building out that new relationship? Or is that kind of like one of those barometers that, let's see how the new partner takes to incorporating the memory?
In the digital world, Rich, your podcast is all about death and dying in the digital age. He's always around in the digital world, right? I didn't delete pictures of him, and when I was still in the same house and I was with my current partner, there were pictures everywhere. Like, I didn't take anything down because that just did not feel right to me. And it wasn't until I moved that the pictures came down and got put into a book. And the weird feeling that I get is that he has sort of become a part of me. And I don't know I don't think I've spoken to other widowed people about that, but I know that his spirit is doing his thing, which I'm not quite sure of the details there, but I feel like he's become a part of me. Like, there's so much of him that I absorbed and I changed because of knowing him and because of losing him. And he's just like as important to me now as a partner would be.
I can see that memory very similar to a parent or a grandparent or, a person who has impacted your life, right? They have filled so much of your life and made a part of who you are today, that why would you lose that aspect to honor him as you're moving on to that next phase?
Yeah, I have another friend of mine who was widowed and got remarried. She actually had an 8x10 photo of her husband and had him walk her down the aisle and give her away.
Oh my gosh.
Really sweet.
So she had the picture of him walking down the aisle. I just had to take a moment and just visualize
my
that.
eyes are watering.
And what was obviously the new husband was in favor of it. So what was the reaction of the audience?
Probably not a dry eye in the room. It was very sweet.
And this is where your beliefs come in, right? A lot of what we talk about in building out a final playbook is we really want to explore what our beliefs are. And that's why I felt like this conversation was really important because, what are your beliefs about dating after death? And also many people, if we don't percolate this to the surface, people are going to miss opportunities. Again, my husband and I are on the weirder side, but when we did our estate planning, we actually did talk about, what if and what we would want for each other. and we make very funny jokes and kind of, had a moment. It's not, we talk about it a lot, but we've had moments where it's like, that next woman who comes in or the next man that comes in, right? They're going to do this or not have a different behavior. There's a funny saying when I'm talking to some of my older friends and clients is that when they do start dating again, they want to make sure that they're not with somebody who's either male or female, it doesn't matter what side, but they're not either looking for a nurse or a
Oh, I hear
purse.
that all the time.
And these are right, nurse or purse. Like you want someone who's going to be a partner and they're not going to, want out of your wallet and not want you to take care of them. And that's certainly a consideration.
And yet, when we get married young, we're signing up for that, by the way. Like, till death do us part in sickness and in health. Like, it's so funny how, but I guess you don't want to enter into a brand new relationship that's all for most people. Like, they want to have some good years and some fun times. And then, your person could get ill.
And it reminds me of a story that a cousin of mine whose wife died unexpectedly. But they actually did have a moment. It was a joking moment, maybe, where she said, if I die, do not donate any of my body parts. Like, again, it was not official. They didn't document it, but I don't even say, just kind of in a joking way, but he took it very seriously because when the time did come and she passed unexpectedly, and she was in her 40s, the hospital was very much, they can be aggressive when it comes to organ donations.
Yeah, understandably.
And again, she died unexpectedly. So he's not necessarily in a state of mind to be making these decisions. But because she shared that, even that piece there, it's not even the dating piece. It's what do you want done with your body? He had enough sense of her in that moment to say no. And the organ donating society was actually pretty aggressive with him. And he had to kind of defend himself and say, look, I have an organ donor card. I believe in organ donation, but my wife said to me at one point, do not do this. And that was, he was able to stand and make that very difficult decision because they had a passing conversation. So to be able to empower and have more of those. So again, turning back the clock, if you and your husband had that chance, I mean, he talked about his death. Do you think, and for other advice, in what kind of situation should we start having these dating conversations and making sure that those we leave behind are memorialized and empowered to keep living their life? Because the hardest thing than dying is watching someone you love die.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of older couples that have been married for many years, and as soon as one dies, the next one dies like within a week or two. Have you seen that?
Yeah, or definitely within the first year.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's wild. There is this connection, and especially when you've learned to lean on someone for so long, and you really do. Like, I feel like my husband like sort of became a part of me, and we were honestly only together 5 years. So I can't imagine being with someone for 30, 40, 50 years, like, and trying to go on without them. But there are people that do, right? That find that spark. And again, this goes back to our most difficult, challenging events are an opportunity. And it's such a good time to find a therapist, find a coach, find a trusted advisor, find a way, because that grief can really swallow somebody up. And yet we have so much to live for, and there can be life after that person. Yeah.
And again, I go back, and now I'm having flashbacks of my mother. She did remarry, but those first couple of years, because her and my father never had that conversation, hospice didn't exist when my father was dying. So there was not that level of bereavement support that therapists can sometimes offer. And I remember her joining a group, Parents Without Partners. And so she was trying to get some support there, but majority of them were like divorcees. So are there any organizations that you know out there that support widows or widowers in order to, move on with their lives?
Yeah. So I was on a podcast called the Widowed Parent Podcast, hosted by Jenny Lisk, and she's an excellent resource for helping widowed parents. And it doesn't mean that the kids are young. It could be older. She could probably point people in the right direction, even if they're not parents. But there's organizations that do a summer camp for widowed parents where they get together and they have fun. Because I think this whole idea about a grief support group is you go and you cry and you feel depressed and you hear everybody else's depressing story and then you leave. And there is value in the empathy and feeling, but from, I did therapy, but I didn't do a group. But these groups, you want to infuse some life into it. Like, we've experienced the death, but we're all still here. And I think that's where a lot of people can get stuck, is just replaying and reliving and thinking about the death. And it's a very tricky line to walk, to honor a person who we've lost, that you've made commitments to, while also not compromising yourself. And this comes into a whole mindset of people pleasing and doing what we think we should do. And I think it's so important to get in touch with our own intuition. And coming back to talking about dating after a loss, it's so important to be able to trust our own intuition. Because if you sit there and look for a sign that your partner is okay with it, I mean, I just don't think that that's the best approach, because you could be waiting a long time and not really have clarity. Maybe you've had the conversation already when they were alive, and that would be helpful.
So yeah, let's just dive into that so people have some tools to walk away with from our conversation. And when we first started talking today, I did some research, and I feel like there's 3 stages for couples to start having this conversation. That first stage is, when you first get together. I love you. This is what I want to be with. But if you weren't here, how would you feel if that, if I was to continue on with my life? And did you say that you've heard someone say, you better not date, or I don't give you my blessing?
It was more like, go ahead and try.
And again, saying it jokingly, just like my cousin, his wife saying, you better not donate my body to, is it really in jest, or is there a level of truth there that we need to honor? Because if an unexpected death happened and those are the last words you say, that could impact the rest of your future. And I know for some people, they become very stagnated, as you said, like recycling the grief, and they just can't consume it.
I mean, not everybody's in a healthy relationship. And sometimes, till death do us part is not the best thing for some people. So someone might have a partner that is, not that loving, supportive, wonderful. I hope that most of the listeners out there do have that loving, supportive partner that's going to say, of course, like, when I'm gone, I want you to be happy. I want you to be able to be with someone. There's actually a culture, some little tiny small subset culture in India, where all the way up into the last century, when a man died, the woman had to jump into a fire and kill herself.
Oh my goodness.
Widows were not even allowed in society, let alone allowed to date. So I think that and that's the most extreme example I've seen, but in a lot of cultures, the woman is meant to wear black for the rest of her life. Like, I have another friend whose husband died a few months ago, and she posted a picture on Facebook of her like having a good time and smiling, and people actually commented like, how could you be smiling? Like, people are so freaking dumb sometimes. And it really irritates me that not only that people are dumb, but that people actually care and listen and worry. Like, my friend, she just kind of let it go as much as she could, but these things have an impact on us. Like, we feel that judgment and side eye and all of those things. And I just think we need to follow our own heart and our own intuition and do what we think is right as far as honoring somebody, but also be unapologetic about who you are and what you're doing with your life.
I've always felt, and I talk about it, is that when I share that my parents, have inspired me, and my father died at 42, my mother at 50, and how sad that was. And yes, going through it was extremely painful, but now I feel very, again, this is about your beliefs, but my belief is that I feel empowered and incredibly supported by their spirits behind me to go and live my dreams, to have enough power and a sense of being to overcome adversity and frustrations. So like your friend there, it's like the loved one died and like infused all their love within them for them to go live the fullest life ever. And that to me is, let me just pivot just a little bit, because we talked about like healthy, when you're healthy and happy and life is good, and you have those like, it's not those like short drive-by comments about what you would want for your partner. When someone is actually on hospice, let's take that scenario, or has a condition, I always say that the gift of cancer, if you can find a gift in cancer, is that there is actually an opportunity to say goodbye, and that there's an opportunity just to make your peace and to find that peace of mind. And I have heard so many stories where the partners, the couple, they're going through cancer. One of the spouses is going through cancer, and the last thing they want to talk about is when they're not there, because it's so painful. And yet, to have that gift and share what, like, a final wish. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is definitely an opportunity in it. And when we can accept the fact that we are going to die, all of us at any time, whether it's on your deathbed with cancer or when you're still young and healthy, making peace with our own death is such an important part of life. Like, some of the happiest, most energetic people that I know worked in morgues and and funeral homes. Like, they are the happiest people.
That's a humor for sure.
And I think a big part of it is that when you know that you could die any minute, you make better choices in your life. You're like, oh, that vacation, that's too expensive. I better not. I'll wait. And it's like, what if you die while you're waiting? Like, if you can do it, enjoy it, go for it, live it, love it, like, unapologetically, because we just don't know how much time we have left. And it's so cliche, but when people look back at their life, they don't ever say, I wish I would have worked more. I wish I would have not gone on those vacations and saved my money. Like, I can't think of a scenario where someone would feel that way. Usually it's what we look back on is our relationships, the people that we love, the people that we care for and touched. And so I think being close to death and accepting death and understanding death can be a really inspiring thing. It doesn't make sense for a lot of people. Like, they can only see it as a black and white thing, that life is good and death is bad. And it's just not that way.
Are you okay if we talk a little bit about like some of the administrative pieces? Like, I know we've been very heartfelt right now. My brain is like, can we talk about estate planning? Can we talk about some of the, be careful, right? Because I've heard stories where, again, you get kind of wrapped up in, I found love again. And you, as a dating expert, sometimes the second or third time around, you're vulnerable and not making good choices and jumping into situations that might not be, from a financial standpoint, how well do you know these people? So talk a little bit about discernment when you're dating.
Well, I'll say when I lost my husband, he was working for a company that had this benefit of providing me a lawyer. And that lawyer ended up becoming like just one of my greatest allies. And he was such a great, nice guy. So I think that's an important piece to the estate planning, is having somebody that you trust, a legal person. Make sure we update wills. My husband didn't have a will, so things just went according to the probate, the state. Like, I didn't understand any of that stuff. And without this lawyer, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I would have found somebody, but he was so helpful in so many ways. Because legally there's just, Social Security stuff and paying his taxes and accounts that were, I didn't.
Passwords.
Yeah.
Employment. I mean, he was still working, so I'm sure the employer had like some loose ends that they had to clean up, that in your distress you had to manage as well.
Yeah, and like telling people, and I not only got into his phone, but I ended up like pretty soon after he passed, getting rid of my phone and just taking on his phone, and like, like I said, it's weird how they just sort of become a part of you. But we need to be careful too. I've met people who get together and they don't update their will, and the will is still saying everything goes to their ex. Or like, there's just really outdated things that we need to get on it. And when we procrastinate,
Beneficiaries, right? The bank accounts, the beneficiaries, all the life insurance, right? I mean, you have to update yours too. And I guess that's that cautionary. That's kind of what I want to say, is that there are predators out there that are looking for grieving widows that want to take advantage. Can you lend me money? Loan me money? Can you put me on your, start changing access of your accounts? Like, those are things that people really need to be prudent on.
yes. And again, learn to follow your intuition, because when you're connected with your intuition, you'll smell those shitheads a mile away.
Get a lawyer. And setting it up, not to step into this too, I just wanted to make people aware, again, there's finding love again, but finding love doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be all in, certainly right away. I've met people who started dating after death, and one of the partners refused to sign a prenup. It's like, if you love me, we don't need a prenup. And if there's assets or inequity within assets, again, it's trying to keep that level-headed minded when you're exploring love again, but there's still that legal, financial, physical, and digital aspects that you need to just be very careful with.
There's another thing about dating after death. A lot of those people have not dated for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, since before the dawn of online dating. Things have changed a lot, and mostly not for the better. I love to be a resource. I'm a dating expert. I've been a matchmaker for years. I was single and figuring it out for myself for years. And I've helped now hundreds of people. And most people don't like online dating, but it's because they're not doing it right. I have a strategy that makes it fun and lighthearted. And it's like people just have these beliefs and expectations of how it's going to be, and then they're massively disappointed, and then they'll just spiral out, and then they give up. And I see it over and over and over again. But there is a way to navigate modern dating, which includes online, also includes the being able to meet people in person. But things have changed a lot. And so I think a lot of people probably don't date. And I think one of the reasons that I did find someone 1 year after my husband passed was because I knew how to, and I knew how to date, and I was exposed to single people that I could potentially date. I mean, it's very practical, even though there's a emotional, spiritual component to finding love. In a very practical sense, if you're just sitting at home and hanging out with the same 5 people all the time, you're not going to meet somebody. You're just not. And you might think, oh, it just happens when you're not looking, and I'll just meet them at the grocery store. But that is so rare these days. Like, everyone's in your
the Hallmark moment. We're coming up under the Christmas season, and all my husband's doing is watching Hallmark,
That's so cute.
So it's not always a Hallmark moment, is what you're saying. Can be, but not
Sometimes
always.
we have to go out into the dating pool and see what's in there. And I hear from a lot of people that there's a lot of pee in the dating pool. So again, with that resilience, like, you can't go into it too fragile. And I think after we've lost someone, we are very fragile. And so we need to take some time to heal and to build up our resilience, because that dating journey is going to stretch you. But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to get to know yourself. Who am I without this partner? Who am I? What kind of relationship do I want? What kind of person do I see myself with? How can I learn to communicate effectively and be good on dates? Like, there really is a lot to it, and it can be complicated, but having that partner, that love, that support, somebody that when you are feeling self-doubt, they remind you how awesome you are. Like, the kind of love that makes all the dating complications and all the judgment and all those things just totally worth it.
And with that, Whitney, thank you so much. How can people find you if they wanted to learn more about your services and coaching?
My website is just my name, Whitney Kobrin, KOBRIN.com.
Perfect. Thank you again. And for those that are interested, please reach out to Whitney and keep your digital assets safe. And as we move on into the death and dying in the digital age, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.